Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest installation of All Tech is Humans bi-monthly live stream series. If you're not familiar with All Tech is Human, we are a nonprofit committed to tackling wicked tech and society issues, whether that's dealing with emerging technology like generative AI, or a lot of the issues connected with social media. And that's actually the conversation that I'm going to have with Adele Walton today, who's got a new book coming out called Logging Off, the Human Cost of Our Digital World. So Adele is just going to be on in a minute. And like a lot of people in the responsible tech space, has a very traumatic incident that occurred in her family that led to her kind of passion that right now is changing the lives for many people across the world to hopefully make a better tech future and, more importantly, have a better human experience. I'm kind of your moderator for today. My name is David Ryan Polgar. I'm the founder and president of All Tech is Human. We've got a global audience, so after this live stream, feel free to stay in touch with us in our Slack community, where we have over 12,000 individuals, all different backgrounds, walks of life, disciplines, perspectives, across 105 countries. So feel free to check that out. You can see that at alltechishuman.org. We have a host of different activities across education, careers, and community building, such as this live stream series, but also regular gatherings, and then a new ATIHX, which are independently organized gatherings that are happening across the globe, with recent ones that have occurred in Barcelona, Toronto, and Paris, and many more. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Adele. Adele, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, David.
Thank you also from your publisher for sending this advanced copy of Logging Off. I know you've been kind of an inspirational voice in this responsible tech community focused on your organization, Logging Off. But more importantly, at least the way that I, perceive a lot of your work, striking that balance as humans. Even the name of the organization that I'm with, All Tech is Human, we're trying to center that kind of human agency with our decision making, because at the end of the day, we all want to have, more friends, more love in our life, and more happiness. And how we get that, I think, a lot of people are agnostic. So our technology that affects how we live, love, learn, we need to put that in the direction that is going to achieve those parts. But with Logging Off, because obviously it's a very big deal to type away and write an entire book, something I've been meaning to do over the last decade, right? So it's a huge endeavor. So congratulations on that for this upcoming book that we're going to see. But for people who are tuning in, for people who are participating or might see this video after our conversation today, love to learn a little bit about your own kind of personal experience and what inspired you. Because as I was kind of saying in the brief intro, one of the things that I've always noticed, and this happened through our gatherings, I've had the privilege of honestly talking to thousands of people over the years in this space. And the one part that I always notice is there's usually a reason, right? People don't get into this space, this ecosystem for money. There's easier ways to make a dollar or make a pound, right? They don't get in for fame. There's usually some aspect that's a huge draw, because I know we do a lot with like child safety, and like in those areas, there's maybe something that might have happened or some larger reason. So I know in a lot of your work, you talk about, as a kind of a youth activist growing up in this entire space where, social media in itself is a large experiment that we're trying to determine what its larger impacts are. I know that's informed a lot of your work, but for everybody, for our participants, would love to hear a little bit about your personal story. And I know, obviously, it is going to be a little bit more intense for those watching.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like you say, it's not just in the responsible tech space, but when you're in the climate justice space or the feminism space or racial equality space, people come to the movement because of their personal lived experiences a lot of the time. If they aren't, allies, then a lot of the time they have that direct connection. And for me, I've been a freelance journalist for, I would say, 6 years now. I started a blog when I was in university, and I was writing about global inequality and health justice, climate justice, a range of issues that I was passionate about. And then in 2022, a few things happened that made me start thinking more about tech justice. The first was that I moved to a small town in a rural part of the UK, and I moved in with my boyfriend, and the first month living in our flat, we received a local newsletter, and I was flicking through, and in the back there was an advert, and it said, "Intelligent pensioner requires smartphone tuition." So when I saw that, I immediately felt kind of like captivated, because as a young person who's grown up using a smartphone, I'm 25, so I got my first smartphone at the age of 12 or 13.
Okay.
And I've been an iPhone user since that age. And immediately I felt the need to ring that person and offer my help. So I rang this guy, I left a voicemail, and within a week I was in his flat. His name's Tony, and we're still very good friends today. I'm going to his 90th birthday party next week. We met, and I started basically helping him learn how to use a smartphone. And that got me thinking about digital exclusion. And I think the digital world, what I at least have experienced is that it's sometimes, we all feel like we're individuals. And whilst we feel a sense of connection in many ways, we feel that our experiences are very unique online, and Instagram and, platforms design makes us feel that way. And I had never actually thought about digital exclusion before until I met Tony in real depth. I had never really thought, how have the changes to society since the pandemic and since, more businesses and services have shifted online, how has that affected people who maybe don't own a smartphone or can't afford broadband, things like that. So that got me thinking about, digital experiences beyond my own experience. And then a few months later, in October 2022, I lost my sister to online harms. So when that happened, we were informed as a family by police that Amy had been on a forum where acts of self-harm and suicide are encouraged, and people are instructed on how to do that. They're encouraged, jokes are made about those acts, and we were really, really obviously devastated to find that out. But we were also then, with me being quite a inquisitive person with my journalism background, I felt the need to dig into that more and learn more about this space that I had not heard of before. And from looking at the site, I sort of got a sense that most of the people using this site are there for sadistic purposes, to encourage the minority few who are really vulnerable to take that act, and are gaining some sort of, sick pleasure from doing so. And because of the circumstances of my sister's death, which, to be honest, we are still, as a family, it's nearly 3 years now, and we're still finding out piecemeal bits of information because there hasn't been an inquest yet, and there will be one, and there's an ongoing criminal investigation and things like that. The answers, we still don't have those answers, but that when that happened and when we lost Amy, I realized that when you experience an online harm, you have no one to really go to now. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't the equivalent of an institution like the police, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or like, you know, paramedics. When you experience a digital version of a type of harm, there, the institutions aren't there, the safeguards aren't there. And I just felt that I need to understand why that is and why we've been so slow to match up in terms of our virtual safeguards compared to what we have offline. You
Mm-hmm.
know, for example, something I thought about a lot is if we had a shop on the high street that opened and, you know, it was advertising, this is how you should take your life, or you should, you know, encouraging people, come in, we'll help you do that. That shop would not last a day, you
Right.
know, but
Mm-hmm.
online these spaces are allowed to take innocent lives and to, I would argue from my research, radicalize people into not being able to seek help and not being able to see an alternative. um so that was our experience. And since then, I've been a member of Bereaved Families for Online Safety, who in the UK, many, I'm sure, watching this will know of Ian Russell, Molly Russell's father, who started that organisation. And we became, you know, connected to a load of families across the country, as well as Molly Russell's family, that personally I had never heard of. And I was so shocked to realize how many people there are. And once you become part of this community that no one should ever become a part of, actually, you realize how these harms are happening every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And in my book, I write that we have sort of, I don't want us to sleepwalk into this crisis, that at the moment I feel like we are. And that's from my own experience, but then being connected to all these families who have gone through similar tragic circumstances with loved ones, of all ages, of all backgrounds. So yeah, that was my experience. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, that's how I started writing Logging Off.
Yeah, and what I would say to that, when again, thank you for sharing the story, and also for taking such tragedy and then putting your energy and hopefully such a positive space to change maybe the system at large. Systemic change that needs to happen, so you have less individuals like your sister Amy in the future. But I know I just went and saw a movie that's going to be coming out soon, connected with Bloomberg, called "Don't Look Away." Actually deals with those exact issues, a major part of the film. And then actually some of the families were there in attendance. This was in New York, where I'm based, and that was something that was very common for a lot of the families, is not realizing how many other people had gone through something similar. And realizing that this was a much larger kind of issue. And then to your point, when you think about the physicality of something so sadistic, like some of those communities, we would never allow that. And I think that's one of the parts that we struggle with conceiving of social media at large and the smartphone, is that it's taking you to all of these spaces, or even as was mentioned in the movie, imagine that kind of dark alley space being in your bedroom, or your child's bedroom, or your loved one's bedroom. That in itself reaches the point of absurdity. And then the other part, I'd like to kind of mention with it, is one of the things I've seen in my own work with All Tech is Human is sometimes when you have these extremely intense issues, as we also deal with, reducing CSAM, child safety issues, they tend to be so intense, in terms of the emotional reaction that people have to them, that it seems like we sometimes, as individuals and society at large, kind of shoo them away, because they're almost, not talked about in polite society. These aren't things that you would bring up, at a cocktail party. And I know a lot of times when I've told people about some of these issues, a whole look kind of goes over the face, like they can't believe that this stuff occurs. So you almost wonder if some of the lack of positive action towards fixing these immense problems stems from the fact that a lot of times it's easier to kind of have our heads in the sand than to deal face on with something, dealing with something that is going to be so kind of emotionally triggering for individuals. So if we take this to your upcoming book, right, Logging Off, which again I've had the pleasure and privilege of reading early. What would you, before we get into some of the kind of key issues with it, what would you like for people to kind of take away from your book, right? Because a lot of times I talk about what's the motivation, as we were talking about before. So you have to have a larger motivation for saying, like, I'm going to spend a significant portion of my life dedicated to writing this book and to now putting it out and to talking to people like me, on today's live stream. So what does good look like for you? Like, what would you like after, if somebody's watching this and they pick up, Logging Off, and they sit down, they read the book, over a week. How does their life change? How would you want their life to change?
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
We ask good questions here at All Tech is Humans.
Initially, to your point of, what do you want people to take away? I would really like everyone who reads Logging Off to feel and recognize that this is a fight that we all have stakes in, no matter who we are. Because I think so far, the conversation around online safety, online harms has been polarizing, but also framed as something that only parents should care about, or only one certain demographic of society should care about because they have interests in this. But actually we all have stakes in this. And I think throughout the book I interview teenagers, I've interviewed workers about workers' rights, I've interviewed older people who are digitally excluded, women about their experiences of online harms. And the connecting thread is that, as it stands, big tech is ruling the digital world that we have. And we need to reclaim it, and we need a movement that joins us all together and takes on big tech and says, no, we want not only a social media, but we want artificial intelligence that puts people's lives over profit. We want social media. We want digital ecosystems. We want digital tools that make work better for the workers. All of those things. That's our thing we have in common. So that's what I really hope, that it galvanizes people to recognize that this is a shared fight and we all need to be on the same side, because we do have a lot in common. And then, in terms of how I'd like people's lives to change from reading the book, I hope that it's an enlightening read, in that the title was a bit of a Trojan horse, because I think some people are going to buy it and think that it's just a digital wellness guide. And to an extent, I share tips about that, because whilst writing the book, I have gone through that that process myself of having to spend less time on social media so that I can just get the words done. Else I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to get the deadline. And through doing that, I've recognized that, like you say earlier, the human values that we had, say, 20 years ago in the early age of the internet are the ones that I feel that we need to return to. Those values of connection, of empathy, of wanting a sense of community, of a shared identity. I feel that those are the things that we set out to achieve earlier on, and that many of us hoped for. And somewhere it's gone wrong, and we've lost that vision, and we've lost that motivation. And I write about things like cancel culture in the book, and how divisive actually the online world has become when many of us are drawn to it for those reasons of connection. So I would hope that it brings people back to those values and encourages them to detach more from the digital platforms that we've become so dependent on, because I'm dependent on them too as a freelancer, like utterly dependent, and I don't want to be, but I am. And yeah, I think it is, whilst it's a call to arms and a call to action, it's also like a return to stillness and to slowing down. It's kind of a spiritual call as well, which
Well, that's why I think you
you know,
mentioned like Jenny Odell's work, you
yeah,
know, in that kind of space as well in
yeah,
your book. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed over the years, and especially for somebody like yourself as a journalist, is people will go to what like the structure is, right? So in media, you know, probably starting 10 years ago and maybe more, people were so focused on saying, well, in order to be hired, you have to have a certain amount of followers. You have to, you know, do a certain amount of tweets, and we want, you know, we want you to, you know, be kind of perpetually there. And I think what's kind of happening on the positive side potentially is as society kind of catches up and realizes some of the adverse impacts, you start recognizing that it doesn't have to be this way, because one, there, to your point, if you're reclaiming something, that means there was an earlier time. So when you had the rise of the web in the early 90s, there's a lot more kind of utopian kind of outlook of the importance of connection, of realizing that, you know, we don't actually have a lot of differences, and that it was supposed to be a global village, the term they were using at the time. And somewhere along the line, kind of like the classic parable, like, you know, you got away from the garden, so to speak, right? You got away from where you were going, but then how do you kind of get back to that? But then, especially now when we're talking about Gen Z, or then in the upcoming, you know, now rising up Gen Alpha, you do see a trend where there potentially could be, in certain social circles, less social pressure to be online. And in fact, quite the reverse, that if somebody is on every platform, always posting, if you reframe it differently, like, wow, okay, maybe they don't actually have a lot of personal freedom, or maybe that becomes kind of like uncool. Whereas before, it was an expectation. So do you have any kind of thoughts about that, of what you're seeing, and then specifically with kind of like your logging off club and the changing perception of the compulsion, you know, because people are online oftentimes because they feel like they have to be, and oftentimes jobs even require it, right? So you need to change a certain structure to say, oh, okay, everything will be okay if I'm not on this platform.
No, definitely. I think, you know, that trend has really started with Gen Z and millennial people that grew up using these platforms and have now realized that we have got to an age where we've been sold the lie of connection, and now we look around and it's like, where are my community actually? You know, where is the infrastructure? Where are the people that I want to maybe raise my children around, or start a family, you know, in a certain place? Because we've been so dependent and hardwired to be addicted to these platforms, you know, from our teenage years and from our young brains. I think a lot of us are waking up to the realization that actually this is not what we had hoped it was going to be. And now we're stepping back. You know, my friend India and I, we recently started Logging Off Club. So we host phone-free events across the UK to get people off their phones and encourage connection, wellness, and curiosity. So we do crafty events, maybe more talkative events. But fundamentally, we want to bring people into a space where we say, look, put the phone down, rip off the Band-Aid, because that's what it's become for us, is that it's a blanket of you know, false security. And I noticed that whenever I was in a sort of social setting where I felt a bit nervous or I didn't know people and I had to actually go up to people and say hello, you know, and introduce myself, I was just whacking my phone out and scrolling and not making those connections because I felt nervous. And by, you know, removing the phone altogether, people don't have that thing that they can go to and actually are forced out of their comfort zone to do the uncomfortable thing, but actually the thing that in the long run is going to benefit us. So that's what we do. And we have a Substack newsletter, which is where we advertise our events, because whilst we have an Instagram, that is just so people can find us. We don't want to be spamming on Instagram. That's the whole point. So we're like, right, Substack, our monthly newsletter, that's all you need to look at. If you don't want to look at anything else, that's absolutely fine. And we've been doing that since December. So that's going really well. And I'm really enjoying that because it's giving me as well that real sense of connection. And, you know, I have, like I wrote about in the book, I have so many virtual friends who I've known for years and years, and I've never met them. And that is surreal to think that these are communities and people that I could have genuine, deep connections with. And I've missed out on that because of our dependency on these tools and on these platforms. I think we also, though, as much as it might start becoming uncool to, you know, have a smartphone or things like that, I think we have to remember that tech companies are very smart and very savvy, and they can always market things in slightly, you know, in a slightly different way to keep on our trends, because at the end of the day, you know, companies invent trends. So whilst we might be like, oh yay, you know, we're detaching from this cycle, they will be watching that too, and they are smart and they are savvy. So there's that. But then also, I think teenagers, you know, everyone right now is talking about teenagers and smartphone use, rightly so. And I think my teenage use of social media is what, you know, got me to where I am today, off this realization. But it's taken me 10 to 15 years, and a lot of people won't make that realization because sadly they will experience those online harms, they'll become more isolated, or something worse will happen. And I think that's why we do really need to channel our efforts into actually teaching teenagers digital literacy and teaching them the agency and the skills that they need in order to have agency. Because, you know, just recognizing that it's not popular anymore isn't enough. Actually, kids need to be taught, look, these algorithms are designed to addict you, and this is why. You know, these aren't just free gifts. They are things that are trying to entrap you. And I think digital literacy is key for teenagers and young people.
Definitely. We're just going to bring on a question that Isaac has. I'll just bring that up in a minute. But what I also say to a lot of your commentary is I always personally kind of think it's a kind of a combination of those factors, right? So one, you have the design of the smartphone, and also the design of kind of the systems that we're using. And you talk about in your book, like the slot machine effect and variable reward, right? Is something you don't know what's going to appear. That itself kind of hacks at our brain a little bit for how it's going to kind of drop in the dopamine kind of hit. But also the understanding that we have to dig beneath another layer of ourselves to say, well, why do we feel this compulsion? So, for example, if you have a couple and they're sitting around the dinner table and they're both on their smartphone, on one hand, you could blame this on the sexy design of an iPhone, which obviously they did spend a lot of time to make it feel and look beautiful, right? And maybe even just the attractive nature of the platform. Maybe they're scrolling through, right? Maybe even the kinetic feel, or the kind of haptic feedback that you would receive through your thumb, right? Of how when something is even liked. But then you also have the idea that maybe the couple, maybe they feel their own kind of compulsion of why they would rather escape the synchronicity of human connection, because that in itself is difficult. That in itself is an unknown. So it's always going to be easier. So I think a lot of the attraction sometimes of social media at large, and just a lot of our digital tools, is based on the path of least resistance. And to your own point about the social awkwardness, right? Our own skills can atrophy over time. We've known this, right? If a person is a hermit and they're up in the woods for 10 years, if they come out of their house, they're not going to be a friendly person to talk to at the cocktail party, right? So we know that you need to practice these social skills. So I think that's something we're also going, especially in a post-COVID world. So we're just going to bring this up, this one question, and then we'll actually start kind of wrapping up our conversation. Obviously, we could go on for ages, but we want people to obviously connect with you, and especially the Logging Off clubs, and then also to check out and read your book, Logging Off. So this question from Isaac says, how could we challenge these systems when we are required to engage with digital systems in order to engage in our world in the first place? Huge problem, right? And it gives as an example, applying for health benefits online, completing a housing form online, learning new information appropriately and responsibly online. So Isaac, thank you for that question. So something, Adele, that we were kind of, inferring earlier about you sometimes feel like you need to be online, especially even this 90-year-old you were talking about, the kind of the fact that oftentimes things are digital first or digital only, which means that you might not even have the option to say, you know what, I'm gonna go full analog. Can you go full analog? So any thoughts or commentary on Isaac's question, Adele?
No, it's a great question. And, with increasingly governments having that incentive to go digital because of pressure from tech companies a lot of the time, but also, because of the convenience in many ways, it is something that is really important. I think one great example was in the UK, and it's an example that I talk about in the book, when they were planning on getting rid of ticket offices at train stations across the UK. And there was luckily public outrage, rightfully so, because a lot of disabled people would not be able to access train stations if there were not physical, ticket barriers, but also the people that are working there. If it's all just on screens, that's not accessible for many people, but equally so it's not accessible for people who are digitally excluded. And that saw the biggest public consultation in response to that decision ever in history in the UK. And I think that's a real brilliant example of, like, when we're not happy with something that in the digital realm, we can make our voices heard. And actually speaking to your MPs, writing to your representatives is such an underrated form of expressing your digital rights in a democracy. And it's something that I repeatedly saw throughout the book, because a lot of the time as well, I know from engaging with MPs as a campaigner, a lot of MPs either are on your side, in terms of the concerns that you will voice to them, but they don't actually know that those concerns are shared with their constituents or with their community. And unless they're being pressed by their constituents, they're not going to, pose that challenge to government or decision makers. So I would say that the best way to challenge those systems is by speaking to your MPs and writing to your representatives, because they do really care and they are concerned, but they need to know that we are just as concerned and worried about things as much as they are.
And obviously, since you're in the UK, and also the EU have been a lot more active, especially around kind of the new Online Safety Act and various other kind of movements. So I'd be curious to see how that impacts other parts kind of globally in this movement. But Adele, I want to obviously thank you, deeply for this conversation. I want to recommend that Logging Off, that is a book that you kind of put in your pre-order and read that later on, and then maybe more importantly to the point, as you but Adele, you have a voice in this, and that's something I've personally seen as well. Is a lot of times people opt out of the situation because they feel like they don't have a certain expertise or a certain megaphone, if you will, to be heard or to influence. Whereas as you kind of put it, we need this kind of collective action. So lastly, before we head out, where can people kind of stay in touch with some of your work, get involved with logging off clubs and other parts to kind of join the movement at large?
You can join Logging Off Club via our Substack newsletter, which goes out monthly. Ironically, keep up to date with my work on Instagram, Adele_Walton, and LinkedIn are probably the channels that I use most often. But I also do have a website, adelesnotes.co.uk. So yeah. Thank
and
you.
we'll share all those links, after this video goes out in our own bi-monthly newsletter for All Tech is Human. So I'm David Polar with All Tech is Human. We'll bring up Lindsay's statement there to go out on a high note. So thank you, Lindsay, for saying that. But more importantly, Adele, thank you for writing your book, and thank you for your work at large to kind of carve out and influence a better tech future that I think can alter kind of our lives at large, because that's what it's all about, right? It's not really about the tech. It's about a better community and better kind of individual experience as well. So Adele, thank you for coming on.
Thanks very much, David.